My name is Daniel Clarke, and I remember the exact second my heart stopped. It happened on a cold morning in January. One moment I was standing in my kitchen pouring coffee. The next I was gone. I didn't fall dramatically. There was no crash, no panic. It was quieter than you'd expect. First came the stillness, a strange, heavy quiet, like the entire world hit pause. The sound of the heater humming, the soft clink of my spoon against the mug. Those sounds faded as if someone slowly turned the volume down. My vision narrowed, the walls of my kitchen blurred, colors dulled, and the edges of my sight collapsed inward, closing like a camera lens. Then came the final breath. It wasn't violent. It was soft, like a whisper leaving my lips, taking with it the weight of everything I'd ever carried. And in that split second, I realized something I had never truly understood before. Dying isn't like falling asleep. It's like waking up, because the next sensation was this. I felt myself pulled from my body, but not torn. It was gentle, like slipping out of a jacket that no longer fit. One moment, I was inside the limits of skin and bone. The next, I was standing beside myself, watching my own life collapse to the floor. This isn't a story about almost dying. This isn't about a close call or a near miss. I died, fully, completely, and what I'm about to share with you is exactly what happens in the first hour after you cross over, because I lived it. And once you know what I saw, you'll never look at life or death the same way again. Before that day, my life looked like anyone else's. I was 52 years old, married to my wife Ellen. For nearly 3 decades, we raised 2 kids together, both grown now, living their own lives, one in Chicago, one overseas. Empty nest, quiet mornings, weekend phone calls that always ended with, "I love you, Dad." I wasn't extraordinary. I worked in logistics, managed a small team, showed up on time, paid my taxes. My life was steady, predictable, and for the most part, good. But if you had asked me to name my biggest fear, it wouldn't have been sickness, or failure, or even losing the people I loved. It was this, the moment of death, that unknown second, when everything stops. I believed in God. I prayed. I read scripture now and then, especially after my father passed. But there was always this lingering question, lodged in the back of my mind, like a splinter I couldn't remove. What happens in that first hour after we die? Do we drift into nothing? Do we float in the dark, waiting for something to come next? Or do we simply blink out, vanish like mist in the morning? I carried that fear quietly, smiling at family gatherings, singing in church. But deep down I worried about what would happen when the heart gives out, and the body goes still. On January 14th, 2024, I got my answer. It wasn't planned. There was no warning. I was driving home from the grocery store, thinking about dinner, when a truck swerved into my lane. The sound of metal colliding is a strange thing. It's sharp, but distant, like hearing thunder underwater. And just like that, my life ended. But what came next? That's where the real story begins. The first thing I remember after the crash wasn't pain. It was silence. Not the silence of a quiet room, but a total stillness, like the world had been placed under glass. No heartbeat, no breath, just awareness. I saw my body slumped in the driver's seat, head tilted forward, motionless. There was blood on the airbag, steam rising from the hood, but none of it felt real, because I wasn't in the truck anymore. I was above it, floating, but not like you'd imagine. It wasn't like hovering in the air. It was more like being untethered, as if gravity had forgotten me. From that vantage point, I could see everything at once. The crumpled metal of my truck, the other driver stepping out of his vehicle, shaking, dialing 911. The sky above me stretched wider than it ever had before. I saw details I shouldn't have seen. The way the clouds moved, the texture of the pavement, the microscopic droplets of mist in the cold air. But I felt no fear, no pain, just clarity. And then, time shifted. It stopped following the rules. Seconds felt like hours. Hours felt like seconds. It was all happening at once. At some point, paramedics arrived. I watched as they cut open the car door, pulled my body from the wreckage. They worked quickly, chest compressions, oxygen masks, defibrillator pads, slapped onto my skin. But I wasn't in that body anymore. I was watching the scene unfold, as if it belonged to someone else. What surprised me most was the calm. There was no panic, no struggle, only an overwhelming sense of love, not for myself, but for everyone else still there. I saw the face of the first responder, his eyes wide with fear, his hands trembling slightly as he checked for a pulse. I felt his exhaustion, his hope, his unspoken prayer. Please let me save this one. But I wasn't afraid, because somehow I already knew the moment my heart stopped wasn't the end. My senses had changed. I didn't just see, I perceived. Vision wasn't limited to a forward gaze. I could see in all directions at once, as if the concept of behind and ahead had dissolved. Hearing had shifted too. It wasn't sound I picked up, it was emotion. I felt the grief of the paramedics before they spoke it. I sensed my wife's name whispered in my own fading mind, even though no one said it aloud. And in those first 5 minutes after death, one truth became clearer than anything I'd ever known in life. We are not our bodies. We never were. At first I thought I was alone, hovering above my lifeless body, watching the paramedics work, feeling their urgency, but not their panic. But then something shifted. The air itself changed. It wasn't wind. It wasn't sound. It was more like the fabric of the world peeled back, revealing layers I'd never noticed before. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. A presence stood beside me, not standing, exactly, because there was no ground anymore. But it was there, a being of light. Not the kind of light you see with your eyes. This was different. It was alive, pulsing with warmth, intelligence, and something else. Recognition. I couldn't see a face, but I knew it was aware of me. It didn't speak with words. It didn't need to. Its thoughts flowed directly into mine, like water filling an empty glass. You've crossed, it said, not with a voice, but with knowing. This is the beginning. I wanted to ask where I was, what was happening, but the answers came before the questions could form. I saw them, other souls, scattered across the same space I now occupied. Some hovered near hospital beds, holding on to the last threads of life. Some stood in the wreckage of car crashes, like me, watching loved ones cry and plead. I noticed something strange. Not every soul felt the same. Some radiated peace, their faces calm, eyes soft, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Others were confused, pacing back and forth, muttering thoughts that no one could hear. I'm not ready. This can't be happening. I need more time. And some resisted entirely, clinging to their broken bodies, trying to squeeze back into skin that no longer held them, repeating the same phrase over and over. No, not yet. No. I understood then. Death is not the same for everyone. For some, it's a homecoming. For others, it's a doorway they refuse to walk through. The being beside me, my guide, though I never learned its name, gently turned my awareness outward. And that's when I saw it. The layers of reality. The earthly plane, the one we call real life, isn't the only world that exists. It's just one layer. Right beneath it, woven into it, is something more. A spiritual dimension that overlaps everything, always present, but invisible to the living. I could still see the paramedics working. I could see the cars driving past on the freeway, unaware of the veil they were moving through. But beyond that, I could see the echoes of prayers, the ribbons of grief wrapping around the people I loved, not as sound, but as energy, vibrations of raw emotion, glowing softly in the air. I realized something profound. Emotional energy is louder than words in the spiritual realm. I didn't just hear my wife say my name in her mind. I felt it, like a beacon reaching across the divide. The living speak to the dead all the time. Most just don't realize it. Their tears, their whispered prayers, their silent regrets, all of it carries beyond the physical world. And in those first minutes after death, I learned this truth. We are still connected, not by flesh, not by time, but by love, grief, and memory, currents that never stop flowing, no matter which side of the veil we stand on. After those first moments of separation, the being of light beside me did something I wasn't expecting. It didn't pull me, it didn't push me, it simply guided my attention, like tilting a mirror to catch a different reflection. And suddenly, the world around me shifted again. The scene of the accident, the medics, the flashing lights, the bystanders, that all faded into translucence, like a memory dissolving in water. In its place came something else, a passageway, not a tunnel in the literal sense, more like a corridor of shifting layers, pulsing with frequencies I can barely describe. It wasn't just white light, it was every color I've ever seen, and thousands I haven't. Colors that don't exist in earthly language. Blues that felt like kindness, golds that tasted like trust, silvers that sounded like forgiveness. The air vibrated with something that resembled music, but it wasn't made of notes, it was made of meaning. A chorus of tones sang through the space, layered harmonies of welcome, sorrow, joy, and awe, all woven together. It wasn't external, it was inside me, resonating in the deepest parts of my consciousness. As I moved forward, I felt pieces of my life brushing past me. Not a life review, but life echoes, moments that clung to my soul. The laughter of my son when he was 5, riding on my shoulders in the park. The sound of my wife's voice whispering my name the night we lost our first child. The feel of my mother's hand resting on my forehead when I was a boy, sick with fever. Each memory whispered as I passed, not to judge me, but to remind me who I was. And then I noticed something else. I wasn't alone in this corridor. There were others moving beside me, just out of reach. Souls of people who had crossed over in the last few hours, maybe even minutes. Some looked forward, eyes filled with peace, stepping deeper into the light. Others lingered at the edges, hesitating, whispering things I could feel but not fully understand. I'm not ready. I need to say goodbye. Please, just one more moment. Their emotions rippled through the passage like waves on still water. I passed by the soul of a young woman. I knew nothing about her, but I could feel her confusion. Her death had been sudden, a car crash like mine. She wasn't angry, just lost, trying to understand what had happened. A little further, I sensed an older man, his spirit calm, even joyful. He was moving forward, with no resistance, no regret. There was a softness around him, like someone walking toward the home they'd waited for all their life. And then there were others, the ones who resisted. I could feel them trying to cling to the life they had left behind, clutching at the past, pulling at the seams of time, begging for a way back. The emotional atmosphere was calm, but weighty, not heavy in the way grief is heavy, but in the way standing in a sacred place makes you aware of every breath you take. I understood then, this was transition. This was passage, not punishment, not reward, just the unfolding of what comes next, in whatever state your soul chooses to receive it. And all around me, the corridor of color, sound, and memory carried me gently forward, deeper into the mystery. At some point, the passage of colors began to soften. The sounds faded into silence, not an empty silence, but a living stillness, as if the air itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. Ahead of me stretched a vast open field, shimmering with a kind of light that can't be described in earthly terms. It wasn't grass beneath my feet. There were no feet anymore, but there was texture, warmth, and the sense of being held by something greater than gravity. The field wasn't empty. In the distance, I could see a gate, simple, elegant, not made of gold or jewels, but something alive, a structure woven from light and memory, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Beyond the gate, I sensed something vast, something my mind couldn't fully process. It wasn't just heaven, it was the source, the place from which love, life, and meaning itself flow. But I wasn't there to pass through it, not yet. As I stood at the threshold, I noticed figures appearing around me. At first, they seemed like shadows in the light, but then they became clearer. My grandfather, my mother, an old friend I hadn't thought about in years. They stood at the edge of the field, faces soft, eyes bright, not speaking, but radiating calm reassurance. They didn't move toward me. They didn't wrap me in embraces or flood me with emotion. They just stood there, quietly, letting me know, we're here, but you're not done yet. It wasn't a reunion, it was a message. I understood it instantly, without a single word exchanged. Their presence wasn't about my comfort, it was about connection. A reminder that love doesn't break when the body dies. It stretches, it evolves, it waits. I felt no sadness, only a deep, gentle knowing. And then something else arrived, something bigger. It was the sense of God's presence, not fully seen, not fully heard, but felt in the core of my soul. It wasn't a man on a throne. It wasn't a booming voice in the sky. It was a presence behind everything, in the air, in the light, in the very fabric of this place. It was like being close to the ocean. Before you see the waves, you can feel the pull of the tide, the vastness beyond the horizon. Even when you're still standing on the shore, that's what it felt like to stand at the gate. And in that moment, something inside me clicked. I saw the pattern, not of my life, but of all life. The universe isn't random. It isn't chaos stitched together by chance. It's woven, a tapestry of choices, moments, love, loss, prayers, and forgiveness, all connected, all accounted for. There are no accidents here, only paths, each leading somewhere, purposeful, even when we can't see it from the ground. As I stood there, at the threshold between the world I'd left behind and something far greater, I knew this wasn't the end of the journey. It was simply the next step, and my time wasn't over, not yet. Standing at the gate, I thought I was finished with revelations, but then something else happened. Something I wasn't prepared for. The life review began. Only, it wasn't what I expected. There was no giant screen, no reel of images flashing across the sky, no divine judge reading from a list of my failures and accomplishments. Instead, it was real-time immersion. I didn't watch my life. I became it again. Every interaction, every word, every silent thought. But here's the part no one tells you. It's not just about what you felt. It's about what you made other people feel. I relived moments I'd long forgotten, not as memories, but as echoes of impact. When I smiled at a stranger in the grocery store who was quietly battling depression, I didn't just see it. I felt their relief, their fleeting sense of hope that maybe the world wasn't as cold as they feared. When I snapped at my wife in frustration over something trivial, I felt the sting in her heart, the silent wound I left behind that day. There were moments of kindness I had no idea mattered. Simple things. Helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries inside. Holding the door for a mother struggling with her child in a parking lot. I didn't think twice about those acts. But here, I could feel the shift they created. Small ripples in the fabric of someone else's life that grew larger over time. Then there were the heavier things. Times I held grudges longer than I should have. Times I stayed silent when I should have spoken love. Moments I chose pride over compassion. I felt the disappointment ripple outward, not as punishment, but as awareness. That's when the guide, the being of light, reached into my thoughts again. Not with condemnation, not with shame, just a gentle message. This is not judgment. It's learning. I understood in that moment. There was no cosmic scoreboard, no tally of good versus evil, no balance sheet hanging in the sky. It was something much more profound, understanding the ripples of your existence. Every decision I made didn't just affect me, it branched outward, touching lives I never met, influencing moments I never witnessed. It wasn't about sin and virtue, reward or punishment. It was about connection. How every choice, no matter how small, contributes to the web of humanity. I felt the laughter I sparked. I felt the tears I caused, and I realized the depth of my responsibility, not out of guilt, but out of love. The guide whispered again, this time softer. What you do echoes in eternity, not to haunt you, but to teach you. And in those minutes between death and whatever comes next, I learned something more valuable than any sermon I'd ever heard. Life matters in ways we can't begin to understand while we're living it. Every word, every gesture, every moment of grace or bitterness leaves an imprint. And when the review is over, you don't leave carrying shame, you leave carrying wisdom. After the life review, I thought I would continue moving forward, deeper into the light, closer to the source of everything. But instead the guide spoke again, not in words, but in direct knowing. There is a choice now, and suddenly, I understood. I could stay, or I could return. You can continue forward, or you can return to complete your purpose. At first the answer seemed obvious. Why would I go back? There was no pain here, no fear, no confusion. The love surrounding me was so complete, so absolute. It made every earthly joy feel pale by comparison. I wanted to stay in that peace forever. But then I felt them. My wife, Ellen, kneeling by my hospital bed, her hand gripping mine, whispering my name over and over. My daughter, eyes swollen with tears, begging silently in her mind, "Please, Dad, come back. Just come back." I could feel my son too, his thoughts reaching out to me across the miles, though he hadn't even been told yet. A sudden, aching pull in his spirit, that something was wrong, that he might never hear my voice again. Their love reached me like threads of light, stretching across dimensions, tugging gently at my soul. And that's when the conflict rose inside me. I wanted to stay, I wanted to step through the gate, and dissolve into the source of all things. But I also wanted to finish loving my family. There were conversations left unsaid, moments still waiting to happen, hands I hadn't held enough, words I hadn't spoken enough, forgiveness I still needed to give, both to others and to myself. And so I made the choice, not because I feared death, but because love is bigger than fear. I turned back, not with my feet, but with my will, and in the very next breath, everything changed. Coming back was nothing like leaving. The return was brutal, like being crammed into a box 2 sizes too small. My soul, once weightless and limitless, was now jammed back into flesh and bone. I felt the shock of breath tearing through my lungs. My chest burned. My heart slammed against my ribs like a fist pounding on a door. Sounds flooded in, the beeping of machines, the frantic voices of nurses, the sterile smell of hospital air, cold metal rails, IV lines taped to my skin, the harsh fluorescent lights stinging my eyes. My body felt heavy, like I was wearing a suit made of wet cement, and for a brief moment, I grieved, not for life, but for the beauty I had left behind. The colors, the music, the connection, it was all gone in an instant. But then I opened my eyes fully, and saw Ellen's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, her lips moving, whispering, "Thank you, God. Thank you for bringing him back." And I realized something deeper than grief. I had been given a mission. I wasn't sent back just to survive. I was sent back to tell the truth, to speak plainly about what happens in the first hour after death, because most people fear the unknown. But I no longer do. Now I know. And from that day forward, my life had a new purpose: to help others understand that death is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It's simply the next chapter of a story that never truly stops. If you've stayed with me this far, there's something I need you to hear, not with your ears, but with your heart. If you've lost someone, know this: the first hour after death is not fear. It's not chaos. It's not emptiness. It's love. It's connection. It's a transition into something more real than anything we experience here. Your loved ones, the ones you miss, the ones you talk to in the quiet moments when no one else is listening. They're not gone. They hear you. They feel your love like a warmth wrapping around them, even across the veil. Your prayers, your whispers, your silent tears, they all reach further than you can imagine. I've seen it. I've felt it. And I came back to tell you this, because too many people walk through life thinking death is the end. But it's not. It's just the next doorway. That doesn't mean we should live carelessly, waiting for some afterlife to fix everything. What you do here matters far more than you realize. Every word you speak, every act of kindness you give, every grudge you release, every moment of forgiveness you offer, it all echoes into eternity. Your life is not small. Your choices are not forgotten. They weave into something bigger than you can currently see. So love deeply, forgive quickly, speak kindness while you still have breath, and hold on to hope, not just for yourself, but for those who've already crossed over. Because one day, we'll all stand at that gate, and when we do, we'll see just how much our time here mattered. If this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this message. Help someone else find peace in knowing that death is not the end. It's the next beginning, and none of us make the journey alone.